to go to Wisconsin. I took correspondence and TV courses to qualify for graduate school. And then I was hired by the people I took correspondence courses with to develop a course on critical thinking for teachers. And they had me reading people like Chris Thiede in 1987 and 88. I was reading about the future of education. I was reading all these articles, of future workstation, AI and education, really a couple thick articles actually, Chris. And they got me excited about the field, and I've been pursuing Chris Thiede since then, and I'm really happy I could be part of a panel with him. I've been at Indiana University for 28 years. I spent 3 years at West by God University before that, studying MOOCs, open education, e-learning, blended learning, all that stuff.
All right, thank you guys. Looks like this is a Chris Thiede fan club show. That's all right. And so let me just start by way of introduction of why we are doing this and what we hope to achieve. And before we jump into some more substantive questions, I think this started with Dr. Chen from ECNU Review of Education. Think about, at that time, the spread of the virus was only really limited to China. And China had to close many schools and shut down all those tutoring centers. And it was very tough. And then she was posing a question with the foresight to say that, what if schools were closed for more than a year? What would happen? And I posted that question on Twitter and tried to solicit feedback and comments on my website. I've got a lot of reviews of the post, but only very limited number of comments, which I guess people are just simply busy. And maybe this actually question requires much more effort to think about, than just a quick post or reply on the blog post. So I began to think about this is actually a good opportunity for us to try to rethink how to do education, because we've already observed just putting schools or schooling online doesn't necessarily work. And but also I want to remind us that we are not, even though we have all somehow dabbed into technology a little bit, this show or conversation is really not about technology, but rather it is about education, it's about learning. And technology can play a big part in it, and maybe not, actually, because we have to rethink about this. I just think this is an unprecedented opportunity try for us to rethink. A good point is that I think Chris and everyone involved in technology has worked very hard to convince others to use technology to rethink about learning, but that really has not happened on a large scale. I would say fairly to speak. And it's, who knows, it just took, this virus, this tragedy, to throw hundreds of millions of children online, to close schools like Harvard, like where I am, University of Kansas, like where Arizona is. I think this is shocking. So human transformation may not be voluntary, but can be forced. However, in this kind of forced transformation, we may not have the foresight or wisdom to think long-term impact and long-term intellectual history, rather trying to seek short-term quick solutions. There's nothing wrong about seeking quick solutions. However, we might be wasting a good crisis. I think as we talk about never waste a crisis, I think as Paul Romer of Stanford talk about that too, as in Chinese word, a crisis comes from Wei and Ji. Wei means danger and Ji means opportunity. The phrase means actually crisis. Wei Ji. So in every danger hides some opportunities. So we want to use this opportunity to explore possible ways to rethink about education, to reimagine what new learning can be, but not reimagine schooling necessarily. I think we're not trying to redo schooling. We've been talking about deschooling, reschooling, unschooling for a long time. And we don't have to, we have nothing against an institution, but if the institution binds us into some way of thinking, it may be undone. Or maybe, so all these are all human-made institutions, and they can be undone by human beings. So let's talk about education and learning, not about schooling. And with that, actually, I would like to hear from, maybe start with the Chris. Looks like I'm a moderator, I have to moderate, otherwise will cause confusion. And many of you may have seen this, that we are amateurs at this thing. We don't know how to organize ourselves, which is the professional hazard of all professors. We don't know how to self-regulate, and so I'm going to serve as a moderator. But before I jump into that, I want to say this show, I'm going to call it a show now, is going to be featured guests from different disciplines, different places, both theoretical, academics, as well as visionary practitioners in all those. And we also try to seek long-term suggestions, imaginations, but those imaginations should, and we hope, have some immediate consequences for what we can do and we can do now. And so let me start with Chris.
So the first issue in any initiative is figuring out what question you want to answer, what problem you want to solve. And I think this can be a rich discussion not only among us, but it can also be a rich discussion among all of you as participants, because we don't want this to be teaching by telling either. We want this to be a rich kind of a dialogue among all of us contributing ideas. So I don't want to answer the question of how do we put schooling in the home. I agree completely with Yang that the more interesting question is, what kind of learning can we do in the home that provides a foundation so that when students go back into the school, when this human tragedy recedes, that we really have prepared them in a very powerful way. And also we've developed some models that might help to transform the schools that they go back to. And I'm very optimistic that this can be done, because if you think about 3 decades ago in 1990, if this virus had happened then, we would have been in terrible trouble. Most homes did not have the internet. There were no mobile phones. There was no social media. Web browsers were in a very primitive form. We would have really been in trouble. And now we have all of these tremendous technologies that we can use, not to use technology, as Yang was saying, but to enable much more powerful ways of learning. And what troubles me is that what I'm seeing people do is what they would have done in the 1990s. Of the new technologies to do new ways of learning, they're still trapped in the old wine and new bottles phenomenon. And as a clue to where to look for the answers to this question, I think one theme is social media. If you contrast the informal learning that kids are often very sophisticated about, and the formal learning that they often dislike, and in many cases that doesn't work well for them, social media is all about figuring stuff out with your peers, with a lot of powerful interaction. And that's how we should be thinking about approaching this problem. What are the social media that kids are using? How can we repurpose them from relatively meaningless questions about entertainment to very powerful kinds of academic insights? The other thing that I'll say is that at this point in history, with this tragedy, we need more affective and social support than typical in schooling settings. Just optimizing the cognitive is not going to help when all of us are struggling with a lot of affective overlay. And again, social media are an opportunity for this. So just a few thoughts about what we should be considering and how we might move forward.
I'll provide a little bit of history and add to what Chris was saying. He's totally right. But back in 1990, which is a key year actually, 1990. I'm currently teaching a course on emerging learning technologies. It started in 1990. After going to Chris Thiedi's Summer Institute for AERA on AI and education, Mike Reed at West Virginia and I created a course that's continued to this day. Believe it or not, Chris, it was in San Diego, if you remember. Do you remember who you gave? I can't remember the guy from Rand Corporation or something you gave that talk
Matt
to?
Lewis.
Yeah. Is he still around?
Well, let's focus on.
Okay. Anyways, so in 1990, we did a national survey of collaborative technologies like Aspects, Conference Writer, and Collaborative Writer. And I spent the entire 1990s looking at pedagogy around collaborative tools, including a book called Electronic Collaborators, which came out of Indiana. It's kind of mind-boggling. We're here in 2020, And people are just discovering the pedagogical uses of these collaborative tools now. It's taken 30 years to ramp people up, and who still don't know, and still are thinking about the technology and not the pedagogy behind all the ways you can get peer-to-peer interaction, expert interaction, cross-global interaction, cross-institutional, cross-school, for some interesting projects. And you're right that social media provides a layer on top of that we didn't have in 1990. And also many of these tools are free, unlike back then, 30 years ago, they were not free. They're fairly expensive tools that are out there. So we've been, all of us have been pushing this field for a long time, and we're now at a point where society, unfortunately, is pushing us to rethink education. And one aspect is the collaborative possibilities that are out there for enhancing learning, for enhancing the instructional possibilities in front of our students. So it's exciting to see this emergence. Maybe I should stop there, but yeah.
Yeah, if I can jump in. So I don't know, I'm a very optimistic guy for the most part, but for some reason, I have decided to be the curmudgeon in this group here. So I see the value of I mean, again, having devoted sort of my professional career to educational technology, it's not out of, having a belief or a faith that it can do really powerful things. But I think something that Zhao said in the very beginning, which is that at a time of crisis, we take certain decisions, and we often don't sit and think, and at that point you have to. So there is no option but go online right now, right? There is no option. But at this point in time, we are not necessarily thinking of issues of equity. There are children who do not have access to these technologies, families who do not have access to these technologies. And so here are a couple of the concerns that I have around sort of the decisions that we make, because at some point this COVID thing will get done and we will go back. But two, it won't be to the world that we lived in pre-COVID. It'll be to a new world. And I think the kinds of decisions that we make today, whether around policy or whether around the structures and the guidelines that we give, social media, incredibly powerful potential, right? But at the same time, when I go and I look at the misinformation that is spreading like crazy, and I'm following stuff in India, I'm following stuff here about how we respond to this, about understanding these things. If we don't have the gatekeepers, the structures in place, the policies in place to support that kind of work, right? I worry a lot. I mean, we were already on way to living in a surveillance state. It's this weird combination of 1984 and Brave New World. I think that this crisis is going to empower those movements, and it's going to become a way of life without our having questioned them. So I really come at it sort of questioning sort of these fundamental assumptions that we have made about things, and starting to think of design as designing a system, designing a culture. What are we doing there? Also thinking of what are the principles and values that we bring into that conversation. So increasingly, I'm not going to say that I'm pessimistic, but I will say this, that having done this edtech work for a long time and seen the ways in which social media and all of these things have transformed our world, some positive ways and some incredibly negative ways, that we need to approach this situation, this crisis, very circumspectly. I think the role of people like ourselves and the people who are jumping on the chat is incredibly important, because we can guide what those decisions are. So sorry to be the sort of the crank in the room, but it comes from a good place, let me just put it that way, with a concern of having seen some of these things not play out the way we would have potentially liked to. So, I mean, speaking, Chris, of this online learning, my worry is that we are going to be accepting of the lowest common denominator of what online learning can be. So your point about sort of thinking of the affective issue, I think is incredibly important. Everybody's feeling hyper stressed right now, right? And one final thought that I'll share, and then I will shut up because I could go on forever. One of the things that has become very apparent to us as we look at schools, and I know we are talking about learning broadly, is how much we have put on schools. Suddenly teachers' expertise is being valued by parents all over the world. They're like, oh my God, I can't deal with 2 of them. How did you deal with 22 of them? Suddenly schools, we realize that we have used them for emotional support. We have used them for psychological support, for growth, for development, for special ed, for second language, to give food. I mean, we have created this institution. So that's where I feel that the most potential is that we can unpack this one institution, which we have, we surface talk about it in terms of learning, but it's doing so much more. We can unpack those things and as a society say, okay, who's the group which is going to focus on learning and who's going to take care of the food and the emotional and so on and so forth. Schools have become the center of too much burden for all of society's problems. Anyway, I will shut up now.
Let me cut in before I get Scott and Dr. Chen to say something, because what you pointed out is really interesting, is that the schools as a social institution have been given too much responsibility that's actually is beyond learning. And another one, actually, I was just throwing some thoughts to you guys to say, we've been complaining about schools for a long time. And maybe this is a good time to give kids a break. Maybe we shouldn't force them into online. I know in China something happens, but there's a social issue. There's a big equity issue. Some kids who are in different families actually can use this opportunity to gain advantage. And then there's a families. We know family background plays a huge role. So what kids stuck in what kind of homes matter as well, not only given access. Scott, let me ask you what your initial thoughts are.
You'll hear me echo some things that some other folks here have said. Thank you. Like Chris and Punya and others, I'm deeply concerned about devolving learning and teaching to sort of the lowest level, right? Factual recall and procedural regurgitation, because that's what seems easiest. And we have plenty of vendors who are pitching those solutions to us as well. So, I think one of the big open questions here is, how do we help educators and families all over really, do that, sort of foundational knowledge and skill work, but also focus on the possibilities around deeper learning, authentic learning, real world learning, critical thinking and problem solving, rich, robust creativity, communication, collaboration, global awareness, and so on. So I think that's a big driver. Also, like Punya mentioned right before me, huge issues around equity here, right? So I think it's going to be interesting to see how we respond here over the next few months and the next few years after the coronavirus hopefully winds down a little bit, right? So will this event, will these challenges force us to rethink sort of the purpose of schooling? Do we need to be on such a testing rat race? Many schools are focusing on socio-emotional learning and SEL issues right now because of some of the academic pressures and other factors that are happening, right? And will this force us to step back, like you said, Yang, and think about, could we give kids a break on some of this stuff? Can we step back and think about what other outcomes are important?
There are three things, Scott,
yeah.
Before I get to bring Shuangye and Dr. Chen in here. I think it's really important that what you guys highlighted is just number one, speak of the social emotional things, is that does it, is it as important for kids to learn how to deal with the social emotional things in a virtual world, online, social media? It should not be part of, legitimate concern about, social emotional learning. And we have a lot of writing about the good of social media and the bad of social media. And, as I was, I think, trying to write something here, is that in social media, children never have good modeling from parents, from adults. How do people do social media? Adults hide them from them, and schools don't teach them. We just tell them, don't get in there, that's a dangerous place. And but as if social emotional learning has nothing to do with online, but online, that social emotional learning is precisely their trouble. If from the media study shows that children today in the US, and it spends more time on screen media than in school. That's just, so how do you deal with that and make friends? And another thing is that maybe this distributed nature, I think, talk about authentic learning. Kids actually now are more in the real world than ever, because we've been criticizing schools as a contrived institution, as an isolated institution, has nothing to do with the real world. Now they are, they're dealing with the real world, and now, maybe in different ways. And that's how can we make use of these real problems they face? For example, I remember I was talking to a principal in Hawaii. She was actually, no, I'm actually from Chicago. It's Charlie from the Dewey Lab School, Charlie Abelman, who was standing and said, how crazy it is at that time, the spread was only confined in China. I said, how crazy it is, all our children here in the US are not concerned, are not talk about, are not even introduced to the isolation of children in China, of kids. Why don't we use this opportunity to talk about the global interdependency, global connectedness? We've been talking about global collaboration, flat classrooms for a long time. Why don't we just take advantage of this? So I'm trying to look at the positive opportunities and how do we rethink about this. And now, Dr. Chen, let me actually hear from, because you've been observing the research in China. I know we're bringing you in for more detailed discussion about China's efforts in doing education innovation during the COVID in the last 2 months. Just some high-level thoughts, reactions from your observation.
Yeah, actually, I think there is two things I can share, and I can share in detail next in the next episode. The first one is about there's a kind of concern about organized learning or spontaneous learning. Actually, most during the outbreak of COVID-19, actually China has already been in a very high uncertainty about this, the nature of this kind of virus and what kind of danger it could bring to us. But there's the good side about this, the timing is that still the winter vacation in China. So people still got this kind of time to rethink about what should we do. But most of the cases that I can observe is that people just intuitively, they just use this kind of organized form of learning, just imitating the formal timetabling in the school. Yeah, so they were put those subjects to be examined, like the language courses, the mathematics, and other subjects online, but make it as kind of a formal timetables like there. However, there are still some group of parents, they yelled out, but most from the well-educated backgrounds of the parents, that they say, okay, we don't want like this kind of a formal and very organized learning, just like we are in a kind of school, just doing at home. We want to have our own choice, or we would like kids just to have this kind of more spontaneous learning, like there is they got their brothers and sisters, so they can just enjoy this time being with the parents without too much interruption of this kind of a time slots or this kind of a school things. And so we would like to observe them in this kind of home situation. So this is what I observed first. The second one is back to the equity issues. In our policy, actually, from the very beginning, it emphasized that we have to make this kind of online education in this kind of immersion times to be ensure a kind of educational safety net. That is, like in Shanghai, they got this kind of dual monitor and dual teacher model that I share with Professor Zhao. That is actually they put those the basic things online, recorded as a video, and they invited those almost the best teachers in the city to record it at like a kind of 20 minutes episode, and then they would invite teachers in the class teachers to do this kind of interaction with their students in the classroom. However, besides that, they were make kind of personalized strategy for everyone in their class. That is the kind of emphasize, the policy emphasize that every teacher have to pay attention to everyone. And for example, the the government, they have to ensure that the printed textbook has to be delivered to everyone, every student. And also, if those students, they do not have access or a device to this online education courses, and the teacher should make the ways. For example, they can phone them, or they can pay the visit to them. And in some places, there is still very difficult and challenging, but still they use this kind of a teacher to be kind of connecting with the students during this time. So this the two I observe.
So there's a question on the YouTube channel. I know we will jump into these in more detail when we focus, but I thought it might be interesting just to throw this question out there, because this is from Daniel Scott. So he says, do you think that this crisis is challenging the beliefs and culture behind Chinese education broadly, or is it too early to tell anything?
I don't think this it would be challenging, because it's just like kind of the issue to wear mask or not to wear mask. Or those that educational beliefs are those that ingrained in our culture. So that's why what I shared, that's in the government policy, in those formal programs, around 99% of schools, they just think about, okay, let's move those timetabling online. Very few, but there's still like 1%. They were think out of other ways.
Okay, thank you.
Still doing schooling.
Wanted to be sure that the voices of our viewers were included whenever possible.
Thanks. The idea is still doing schooling online. So actually, I'm going to distill some questions and throw them back. And looks like I have to moderate. I'm sorry. I have to. Someone has. Out of any crisis, you need a dictator. That's the idea. Okay, and the dictators are desired. Any crisis time. So that's why dictators manufacture crisis to get you guys going. Right. So we have a crisis now. I got to man. Anyway, so. From this, there are several things I think it's interesting from our conversation. This thing about broadening right now, I think that I've been observing the Shanghai example as well, is that, this thing about at a very high level, I think, do you think this new education institutions should emerge? Because really, like now, if we all go online, there's no reason for students attending a school in Bloomington, Indiana, to be stuck there. If it's online, that student could be attending another school, let's say in China or Pune in India. So let me start with the Chris to think, do you think actually new education students can emerge, and this may wipe out a lot of the debate about school funding, about class size, all this argument over those things? So could this change the whole argument in a lot of fundamental issues?
Well, I like where you're going with this, Young, because I think we've talked some about ideas, and now we need to talk about processes. There's a proverb that says necessity is the mother of invention. And I think we have a wonderful chance here for bottom-up invention on the part, not just of our guests and us, but on the part of everybody who decides to participate in this initiative. One of the stories I used to tell my children is about stone soup, where somebody comes to the village and some people are eating only carrots, and some are eating only potatoes, and some are eating only rice. And he goes around with a bowl and he says, put in your part and I'll make stone soup. And he puts in a stone. Well, when everybody puts in all of their foodstuffs, you get a wonderful soup that comes out of this. I think that's really what we need. I think we do need something that's emergent. That none of us is smart enough to come up with a comprehensive answer to this that's going to work the first time around, but each of us has a piece of this puzzle. And if we can use media like this and blogging and whatever else we come up with as a community to put the pieces together, then we can really get somewhere. Yes, it's good to have these events. We can throw gasoline on the fire every week, but ultimately, what emerges is going to be from a lot of bottom-up experimentation and sharing, and then, applying solutions to fit the contexts that are so diverse in our educational ecosystem.
Well,
I remember my first time in China in 2004.
I can't control you guys. Go ahead, Kurt.
I was going to say my first time in China in 2004, I had an undergraduate walk up to me at the end of my talk on blended learning. She says, I collected data on blogging and of a couple of classrooms that were trying to create active learning in China. And not many professors are using blogging and not doing active, engaging kinds of things. And as we analyzed the data, it took us a year or so. And by the end of that year, they had 100,000 blogs or 100 million blogs in China or something to that effect. In 1 year, a dramatic change happened within the universities in China because the opportunities were there to create more of a student-centered approach. And I think this too will, and that student is now Dr. Vera Chen at the University of Virginia. She might be watching in here, but there are opportunities provided by this. I'm curious what Shang-Yi, is that right? What you think about the possibilities? I got a student right now studying teacher training in Western China for online learning from Shanghai. And it's fascinating what all the pedagogy of teaching online is being, or the professional development of teachers is taking place today at a dramatic scale to help the teachers of Western China. You talked about Shanghai. What about virtual education in other parts of China as a result of the coronavirus?
Yeah, actually, to our surprise, that actually for those not so well-developed regions, like in the central part of China, even the west part of China, they launched this kind of online education even earlier than Shanghai. Yeah, but I have to admit, in the very first, on the very first stage, people make mistakes. They would always have this kind of fancy imagination about this online education. So, okay, let's do this kind of a live education. So do live show on education, and just so they have this one teacher with 50 or 100 students, but you can imagine there's so many, the population, student population in China, and at the same time, most of those chat rooms were crashed. Yeah. So, and then soon they were switched to this kind of more blended way of doing this. So people learn very quickly, just like every week is kind of a stage to change the plan of how to do those education. And also our experts or a kind of academic here, we are saying that is just within a month, it have already achieved more than 10 years to increase the level of information literacy of our teachers. So so just put them in the water, let them swim.
I think what Shang-Yi was talking about, Chris and Kurt, is that there's actually a reverse to that discussion debate a few years ago, and a debate about MOOCs. Some great genius create one thing, goes back to the 1920s, Thomas Edison's, a big pronunciation about, we just did one thing to broadcast and discussion, and the open university, TV, radio university, all those models. One of the things I observed that's actually going back, this question goes to Punya, is really about the community building, because a lot of times right now, all our education model is still based around the idea, we have a set curriculum, we have someone to deliver that to you, and you go practice that. And our effectiveness measured on that. I think when you guys talk about learning, we seldom talk about the social peer learning. We know learning is social. We know learning is a community, and but how is that organized? Right now, I don't think those factors even is factored in the Chinese discussion. It's still about how well you teach, how effective is your platform. But I'm really curious about how do you organize students into communities in an online way to learn, to form a virtual community, to socialize with each other. I know Punya, you've been doing work in this one, and Scott, and so Punya, I would let you to lead the discussion with that piece, and then we may pass on to Scott and get back to
Sure.
To others.
Thank you. I mean, honest answer is I don't know, for the simple reason that when I think about learning, humans are instinctual learners. We learn from each other, so on and so forth. But I mean, we are seeing the effects of scientific illiteracy in the world around us right now. All right. Science is not easy to learn. Understanding what an exponential growth means. I mean, our biggest flaw is the fact that we have a president who doesn't understand exponential growth. He thinks 35 cases means it's going to become 40 tomorrow and then 45.
And not bring him in. We're apolitical, just.
No. I mean, this is apolitical. I mean, this is
anybody about virus,
So the point I'm trying to say, the point I'm trying to make is that learning complex things, whether it's statistics, whether it is science, whether it's maths, whether it's critical thinking, a philosophy, arts, literature, requires a building of a discipline. Now, I'm not making an argument for the schools as they exist today, right? But some things that schools do right is focus on that discipline. And I don't mean sitting on desks and so on, but focusing on what are academic disciplines. That there is something to be said for seeing the world through the eyes of a biologist, where you look at evolution and you think about DNA and genes and all of that technical information. There is something else to be said about seeing the world through the eyes of a philosopher, right? And I think I worry that this is coming back to some of the issues. I've been reading a little bit of Postman actually, because somebody once, I think Scott, your tweet was followed by somebody with an article saying, oh, I love this Postman piece, I read it. And he talks about like how every time we make a choice in some ways about a technology or a tool, and you've talked about it, Zhao, as an ecological thing, that the changes don't happen just in their lane, changes happen across the board. And then what emerges becomes the de facto natural way of being. So schools are our natural way of being. They are artificial creations. We made that crap up, right? But I worry that, in this kind of situation, we are not bringing in the humanists, we are not bringing in the artists, we are not bringing in the people, the philosophers, the historians, who can help us think about this in a deeper and a more sort of a thoughtful way. Again, it's a crisis, which means we will take certain decisions. We have to, right? So that's my challenge, is like, how do we capture the complexity of learning, which is hard. It's not easy. And how do we create systems that allow for this breadth of learning, not just sort of the narrow, which is what I see happening in India, which is, I think, what is in China, which is, can we learn X? Can you do the following, solve the following equations? That's different from understanding what those equations mean, and different from understanding what implications that has for policy or for this or that, right? So, and just playing my role as the cranky old man here.
Punya, that's precisely the problem right now without the peer back and forth about trying to test hypotheses, because right now I think they jumping online too quickly just by delivering a well-structured lecture, which is no different than the Khan Academy. There I mentioned that name, and other kind of efforts like China's recording the whole thing, But what I think you're talking about is in an isolated situation. How do we get peers, peer debating, peer discussion, peer back and forth is precisely what we need for gaining deeper and disciplined understanding. How could we organize that? So Scott, and let me give you an opportunity to try that, and back to Kurt, because you've been writing about open education. Scott?
Yeah, I'm gonna pull in a couple of thoughts from our guests in the YouTube live chat space. We've got 6 professors here. We're all about the philosophers, right? So, David Quinn, who's one of our guests, brought up a notion from Tayek and Cuban of the grammar of schooling and how difficult it is to crack that code and help schools as social institutions and educational institutions rethink their basic fundamental operational structures, right? But, I was struck also by sort of this note from Rosemary Wren, who says we need the bottom-up thinkers, which is really important, but we also need the resources from policymakers. And so I think the challenge for us here is that, we can talk till the cows come home about, sort of up at this ethereal level. But the bottom line is working parents who are stuck at home with their kids right now are not going to rethink the grammar of schooling. What they need are practical tips tomorrow in conjunction with their local educators to figure out how do we not only keep our kids learning, however we define that, but also engaged and spiritually and emotionally healthy and connected to classmates and educators that they care about and so on, right? And so, yes, we have fundamental opportunities here to rethink large organizational and policy structures, but right now most people are just trying to figure out the day-to-day, and we have to sort of keep that in mind as we talk.
Well, I think thanks, Dave Quinn. I think I love what he's very wise, and although these comments make sense, but I want to jump in to say that I think different groups of people will serve different purposes. And people who are really busy right now, worry about those things, probably don't have time, right, to watch us on a Saturday afternoon or watch us another time. So what we are trying to do here, I think we serve a purpose, because there are policy issues we address. I think we as college professors, what we do best is to honestly raise questions, to raise possibilities. And if we could have solved any problem, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this stuff. We'll be so to make other policies. So I think, but I really take those ideas. However, we will try to bring in as diverse opinions, views as possible. And quite frankly, I have no idea what impact this show will have, whatever solution have. But it's hopefully someday can watch it, or when I'm getting older, when the virus continues for another 10 years, we have something to watch. But anyway, so the whole idea is, but I do appreciate that. However, I think a lot of times when we have discussions, debate, is really trying to say, it might spark some ideas in some places. So let me actually push that question further, because Kurt, you've been writing about open education. I've always been suspicious of it, because the reason is that education is just much more than acquisition of simple knowledge or information. It has to do with the development of human being, develop as a human person, a whole child, also about deeper, as Punya said, disciplined understanding of knowledge acquisition. So Kurt, how do you imagine in an open education, how could we do that?
I want to go back to an earlier point that you said. By the way, the world is open. If everyone can raise their hands, I'll take a picture. Everyone around the world watching. The world is open. Hey, okay. So I want to harken back to your point about community first. I think there's an opportunity here, because today they eliminate all national exams. So why not create goals for kids, have corporations or nonprofits or cross-school goals for these kids who are at home, because humans are goal-driven creatures. And part of building a community, you have to have identity. You have to give to the community. You have to get from the community. You have to have historicity. You have to have experiences within the community. I studied this about 10 years ago, wrote a little paper on it about 15 years ago. But one thing is the goals that you could produce products or have projects within, and you'd be meeting peers along the way that also would be pursuing these kinds of things. So I think there could be, for this year at least, a way to build this right away, because they've eliminated national exams. Here's an opportunity to learn the content in a whole new way, that new structures, new peer groups. The kids you're going to go to school with are not the kids down the block anymore. It might be people in Zoom that you meet around the world. So I have a book that's free to download with 100 activities to teach online. And it's called Tech Variety, and the last way is yielding products. We have 10 motivational principles, and the last one's yielding products. You can download the book right now in Chinese and in English for free at techvariety.com. And you want to build community, this is what it looks like physically, but it's free. 250,000 people have downloaded this. And we translate, Beijing Normal translate to Chinese. And now people in Indonesia. This is one way that building around motivational principles, curiosity and autonomy and relevance and goal-drivenness and challenge. That's what Tech Variety stands for, 10 motivational principles. That's just something I'll throw out there. I haven't answered your open education question. I'm sorry. Maybe Chris can answer that.
Well, I think we got actually approaching time. So Chris, let me give you some final words before we conclude this thing with some future planning.
So one thing that we haven't talked about that I would put at the same level as social media as a powerful lever is immersive technologies of different kinds. We know that the through the monitor, having an avatar in a virtual world scales, because we see that in terms of internet gaming, and even in poor low SES families across the world, people are still involved in these kinds of virtual world entertainment experiences. That's a very powerful medium for learning. And my colleagues and I at Harvard have these EcoLearn, all one word, EcoLearn curricula that we are making available, again, for download for free for any teacher or any parent. They weren't really designed for home use, but there's a teacher's manual, and we can figure it out. The kids can figure some of it out. So I think that one of the things that you'll hear us talk about week after week is putting another kind of technology on the table that may not be widely understood in terms of its implications for education, but we know about it through our work with emerging technologies and evidence-based research, and we can share some of those ideas. But the other thing I want to say in closing, we talk a lot about learning communities. But actually what this initiative is about is an unlearning community. All of us see invisible walls that aren't really there because of how we were brought up, all those years of being a student in the conventional system, all those years of teaching in conventional ways. And we need to help each other with those invisible walls. Each of us sees different ones, and if we work together, we can unlearn together to really be creative about what's possible with this. So I think there are opportunities here not to rush into something, but instead to be playful about evolving bottom up a whole set of things and then looking at ways of integrating them together.
So I would completely agree with you. I think that I want to just get here for all of you guys to ponder, and for our audience to think about too, is that how do we do this better? And as I said before, we have no, this crew has no assistant, has no sponsor. We're just playing this idea out. We just want to bring our own expertise and our own network and out here to stimulate the conversation, to have to spend our Saturday together. I think many of you may have cabin fever already, and I've heard people from getting not very used to for staying home, you know, and some of them called office junkies. But I'm quite comfortable staying here in Oregon. But do think about what makes sense. So let me actually summarize a little bit. You know, today is really more introduction of our panel of ideas, and a couple of things just to highlight is that this is a conversation program. So we will invite really a diverse set of people from different countries, different places, from different disciplines, and different, honestly, walks of life, from school teachers, school leaders, and policymakers, to authors, scholars, potentially solution developers who would have a broad view of education. And the views we want to discuss is that also should have both long-term implication as well as short-term. And I think, Chris, you put out as a standard. We are not really interested in providing like immediate solution like a technology. We're not offering you any tips on use this platform or that platform, which is, if some guest says that, that's fine, but we're not really promoting that, which is easily available. And also we're trying to provide something that's not available by Google. If you can Google it, and don't, you know, we're not going to talk about that. So this is not a fact-based show. It's really a lot of reflections. We also come from different institutions, but we by no means represent the views of our institutions. That's a legal term. So Harvard cannot sue you guys, you know, and neither can Kansas, and that's very important. And but you know, on a more serious note, is that I would invite all of us to think sometimes the impossible. That we are often imprisoned by our imagination. We think, oh, that's not possible. You know, for example, right now, I think Kurt mentioned about the abolishment of all national exams. You just can't get kids together to take exams. I know, like a lot of international examinations that are being held in SAT, ACT. You know, maybe it's time to get rid of those things. Another thing we know, we thought a lot about is national curriculum, national standardized testing. How's the national curriculum going to shift, if that's possible at all? You know, think about. I also know many places have faced constant pressure about tuition. A lot of private schools, international schools, if you're getting kids learning online, they're not paying that much for your nice green field on your campus or your labs. They're going to ask for a refund. How is that going to work, right? That's I think there are some serious issues. I'm also thinking about, if teachers are not paid, could they really build virtual schools of their own, return to the kind of Plato's kind of academy? You know, can they run their own schools instead of trying to work for schools? Maybe reorganize, maybe about teacher unions. Maybe teacher unions can run their virtual schools across for everybody else. And this is the opportunity to go global, to connect globally. So in the next really, we hope this will last forever, even beyond the COVID-19, our conversations. So we'll be inviting guests, and there are many ways. Chris asked me to remind you. I hope all our audience will participate. You can follow us on Twitter. I think Scott has talked about blog posting. You can provide comments on our website, and also you can watch this. You can let your friends watch us. We have recorded this show. We will edit it a little bit because we had a lot of nonsensical things in the beginning. We're going to cut it and then going to post on YouTube. And so we're going to do that, and maybe at the latest by tomorrow. But do let us know, and maybe email us. You can easily find actually our own emails. You can contact one or two people on this. So in the future, we have planned, and what this is what's going to happen. Today, I started a moderator because I was the instigator of this, and there's a Chinese saying actually, 始作俑者必自毙. The instigator always have to kill himself, So I will kill myself for the future. And I served the moderator. I started the whole thing, but we, as a great group, honestly, everybody has put in the effort, and we're going to take turns to invite guests, which is approved and vetted by the group, not really approved. And each one of us is going to serve as a moderator host and in the future. Not all of us will be on all the time in the future, and depending on the topic. And we will make announcement of our future topics, future guests in advance as possible. So next week, next Saturday, we have Sugata Mitra. Many of you may have heard of him, the Hole in the Wall project, and also Schools in the Cloud. If you haven't, you can watch him on his TED Talk. And the reason actually we thought about inviting him was that he's been working with children in places where there are no schools. So we're complaining about schools being closed. And what about how to deliver education when their schools never existed? So what about that? How would that happen? So with that, I want to thank everyone, Dr. Chen, for getting up so early in China. I know it's 5:30 in China in the morning. Wow. And thanks, Chris, for staying over your dinner time, maybe. And the rest of us, we're on the West Coast. We are just having a great afternoon. Thank you, everybody, and I hope to see you next week.
Thank you, guys.